Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you joining Ferrilli this week as we continue our webinar series. Before I turn it over to Carol, as she talks about the benefits of an assessment, what it could bring to you and your campus, wanted to talk a little bit about the format and how things will flow. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put those into the chat window. There's a chat icon at the bottom of the screen that'll bring up a window. And if Carol is unable to answer that question in moment, we will certainly go back to it at the end to ensure that all questions are answered. Everyone should be muted at this point as you join the webinar. If you could remain on mute to keep down background noise, that would be great. And we may ask you to pop off of mute at the end if you have a question to go through that. And lastly, we will be recording the webinar, so you will be able to utilize that. If you're taking notes, you'll be able to utilize the recording as well as the slides for reference in the future. All right, thank you so much. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carol.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this presentation. My name is Carol Thomas. I'm a Senior Vice President with Ferrilli, responsible for several professional services practices. Those relevant for today are really our Banner and Salesforce practices, but certainly you may not be a Banner or Salesforce user, and this still is relevant for you. Just to give you a little bit about my background and how I came to this work, I have served in college leadership positions in technology, marketing communications, and graduate and undergraduate recruiting and admissions. So I have a pretty broad swath of experience, understand the pain points from the perspective of someone at a large university, a small college, or even in community colleges. I have maintained my systems expertise throughout my leadership career, particularly as related to admissions process optimization, marketing automation, and the tools that I've used most frequently are Banner, Salesforce, EnrollmentRx, Pardot, and Slate, recognizing that there are many more systems in the admissions and recruiting ecosystem, but those are the ones that I'm most familiar with. I'm glad to be joined on this webinar today by my colleagues who have experience in many of the other systems that we'll talk about today. So first, I just wanted to say that we at Ferrilli really understand that your technology and your investment technology needs to work for you, for the area that you are responsible for at the institution, and probably most important for your students, and through the recruiting and admissions process to students and their families as we work to help them make that all-important college attendance decision. We really are very proactive in our support for our clients on the optimization of technology, and we believe that we are unique in several ways in the information technology services arena. First, we take a holistic approach. You'll hear about that today as we talk about what the assessment process looks like. We really get to know you and your institution. We are also technology agnostic. So while I rattled off the systems that I'm familiar with, my decision, if I'm working with you, and any of our consultants' decisions working with you, would be really based on what's best for you. And we're happy to provide that whenever you need it. With our clients, we are always here for you. We'll always take your questions. We'll always try to find the answers. And when we're working with you on a contract basis, we guarantee your satisfaction. And we do that in a number of ways. These principles around how Ferrilli does business were very important to me as I joined the company, and they're things that I'm very proud to say we stand behind strongly. One of those pieces is that we really want our institutions to deliver on technology's promise. We know that institutions have invested heavily in technology, or if they've not invested heavily in technology, really need to be making decisions about what technology will support their institution. And one of the ways that we help with that is through this assessment process. So I want to start today by really giving you an overview of what a technology assessment is about, what it looks like. And then we'll switch gears and talk about what it means in the recruiting and admissions space. So we'll talk about what we mean by technology assessment, why you might want to consider doing a technology assessment in your area, who needs to be involved in that process, timing. When is an optimal time to conduct a technology assessment? And particularly in admissions and recruiting, we have some thoughts on that timing. And then how we conduct this kind of an assessment, so you have a sense of what's involved. So let's start with what a technology assessment is. It's really a review of systems, and so one of the things we would ask you for is a catalog of the systems that you use in your area of responsibility. It's a review of processes. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to do a complete business process reengineering for you unless you ask us to, but we really collect information that tells us a lot about the processes that you are using to identify really what's working and what's not working. And from identifying what's working and what's not working, we're able to support you in articulating the desired state that you really want to be at. I think I have a pretty clear sense of where most institutions would like to land on enrollment, and we want to make sure that the optimization process and the assessment process really helps you to understand some of the things you may be doing that get in the way of those goals and how they can be corrected. As a result, we develop recommendations through this process to get you to that desired state. So I'd like to start just by getting an understanding of who's in the audience. And I'm wondering if you would mind answering a poll question about what student information system your institution uses. Thank you, Stephen.
I think we are a full colleague.
Looks that way.
Okay.
So I'm very glad to be joined on this call by my colleagues and in the colleague practice, Kelly Sinicola among them. So I will look to her if we have specific questions around colleagues. So thank you for that. I want to move then to the recruiting and admissions focus of an assessment. What are the things that we're really interested in understanding about how you are doing your work? And the first thing we like to understand is what systems you are using. So you may have a system for handling your CRM activities, your constituent relationship management activities, things like Salesforce or Slate or the Hobson's Radius product, some other products out there. We already know a student information system is certainly very important in this. We would want to know if you're using any chatbots and AI, either in chatting or in other activities, what you're using for marketing automation, what you're using for enrollment analytics. Sometimes those are things that you do in-house. Sometimes those are things that you would contract out to other firms to support you, but having that information would help give us a clear picture on what systems you're using to manage this process. In addition, digital marketing, how you're managing your search, overall data management, and probably one of the ones that's always been most important to me when I've been in a leadership role around admissions and recruiting is my data integrated? Is it moving among the multiple systems effectively and efficiently? So I want to ask now a question about that comes from the recruiting and admissions focus, and just if you have a CRM, what CRM technology are you using? And it's okay to answer none, because there are many schools certainly that are not using that yet.
Okay, looks like we've got a split.
That's right. We have Salesforce, we have CRM Recruit, and we have some folks with none. So that's very helpful to know. Thank you for taking the time to answer that. So the other part of the recruiting and admissions focus is really looking at processes. And here we really want to understand what you have in place in terms of communication planning, what your approach to recruitment might be, how you're managing admissions operations, collecting the applications, processing them, delivering decisions, and then yielding, how we yield that class. We would want to know how agile your systems are and your processes are in responding to changes that can happen mid-cycle. And certainly this year has been a test for that agility. We'd be interested in things related to applicant access to systems. What can they see? How are they seeing that information? How are they interacting with your processes and with your systems, what services you're providing to applicants and their family, and what goes on as you transition these students to college. How do you hand off, for example, to a first-year office, or how do you onboard systems and use technology to support you in that activity? We use all this to identify successes. So what's working? And as I like to say, even at schools where they're feeling somewhat sometimes overwhelmed or underwhelmed by their performance, certainly something is working because we're admitting students into the college. What are the bottlenecks to what we're trying to achieve? So what's not working so well? And then what are the opportunities? Where are the places that we can really make a difference? I sometimes think of that as the wish list that we articulate as part of this process. So some examples of successes that we've seen in the assessments in the admissions and recruiting area that we've conducted. We've seen that some schools do a pretty good job of automating key business processes. Two that I'm particularly aware of from recent work that we've done is merit scholarship awarding. If your institution awards merit scholarships, where do you do it? How do you do it? How do you get that information into your financial aid system? Based on the matrix that you might be using to make a decision about merit scholarship awarding, or based on your processes, you might be able to automate that and see some real benefit in terms of quickly getting to families and the information about that merit scholarship. We've also seen some schools that do a really good job with the integration of the application between their CRM and their student information system. We also see this as typically as a pain point as well, because it's complicated. But certainly automation of some of these processes, and certainly there's many more, can be very helpful in managing through the admission cycle. Some schools do a very good job with messaging to students and families through using automation in their CRM and really understanding their data and how to use that data to effectively communicate. These schools also have robust communication plans, which can be a challenge to put together. They're sort of complicated. They're very data driven. They take effort from a number of people to really make work well. But when it works beautifully. Some of these schools that are doing a good job on messaging are also doing a very good job with affinity communication. So tracking the communication to people based on their interests and the things that the institution has to offer them and perhaps uniquely offer them. And then obviously timely and correct communication. We want to make sure that what we're sending out is accurate. I've worked with a number of schools who had difficulty even around decision letters getting out accurately, and none of us want to be in that position. So these schools have done a very good job with that. And what that means is that counselors, rather than focusing on where's the data, where do I find the data, what do I need to do next, are able to really focus on serving students and families, which is what we would rather have them do. And that means in these cases, we have alignment between the system, the business process, and the results. So that's what a success might look like. Mostly though, in an assessment, we really want to focus on the bottlenecks. What's not working so well? And I've sat in many assessments where folks come in with their laundry list of things that aren't working well, and it's always very useful to have that and to turn that into the opportunities that we'll discuss in a few minutes. But some of the bottlenecks that we often see are things like redundant data entry. I worked with a school that had 2-week turnaround on getting counselors information about an admission application because they were accepting the admission application information in their CRM. Then they were printing it out and entering it into Banner in this case and waiting for that to happen before they'd start processing the information. And I thought, well, that's not a particularly efficient or effective way of doing business. And we got to the bottom of it and fixed it and immediately had an impact on their business process. It is surprising to me that we still see these kinds of things. I don't mean that in any way to be critical of people who work in admissions and recruiting. It's a challenging task, but these are things that I think are, I would consider low-hanging fruit. Sometimes we see that required data on an application inhibits a student's ability to submit the application. So even 2 weeks ago, I was working with a school and they were wondering why they were getting an influx of paper applications. And this particular school had a policy that if you couldn't fill out the admission application online, you would need to submit a paper application. And when we looked at how they had configured their online application, they had a required data field that many students couldn't fill out. They just didn't have the information. And simply going into the banner configuration and unchecking that required data field removed that bottleneck. Similarly, we had a school that on the redundant data entry that was requiring data management in two areas, in two systems that really wasn't necessary. And that was also a configuration checkbox that once we corrected for that, they were able to remove that bottleneck. The results of some of these bottlenecks can be lots of phone calls because students and families don't understand what they're receiving from the institution or the messaging that they're getting through the application process or the messaging that they're getting as they try to work through the process. And this is not really what we want them to experience in most cases. But any kinds of activities that are identified as bottlenecks are things that really indicate that we're out of alignment with the objectives that you likely have for your recruiting and admissions process. Then the opportunities, and this is what many of us would call the wish list. Some of us call it nirvana. My former president used to call it the easy button. I want everything to work easily, simply, smoothly for everyone involved. And I would leave her office and go chuckle because there was a lot of processes that have to align for that. But what we find is that those opportunities can often come in the form of really continuous improvement through each admission cycle. At the end of one admission cycle, reviewing what worked well, what did not work well, analyzing and adjusting, or within a cycle, recognizing a problem and doing the same thing. Mid-cycle corrections and adjustments would demonstrate agility, which is always an opportunity. Opportunities for measurable results. So clear and measurable goals. We all know in admissions and recruiting that our job is to bring in as much revenue to our institutions as possible. And sometimes that messaging gets a little confusing because organizational support will adjust depending on where in the organization you are. But those measurable results in terms of the recruitment activity, the application processing activity, this perhaps in your institution, the speed to delivery of the admission decision, or perhaps the speed to enrollment will be things that you'll want to measure. And then proactive and predictive analytics. We really want to maximize the use of whatever resources, and in this case, data we have to achieve the desired results. That's not just a system, that's really the interaction of the systems that we have and the processes that we have and the way we manage our data to get to that opportunity. And when we get to these, we really are in a place, I would argue, that shows optimal alignment between our institutional goals, policies and strategies, our use of systems, and our processes. Then, what kind of adjustments? What will it take to really get to the state that we want from where we currently are? How can that work be moved forward? What is it that we really need to do? Is it policy changes? Is it system changes? Is it process changes? And again, what are the process changes? What are the system changes? So those are the kinds of things that we would come out of an assessment with recommendations about. So I really want to talk then about why you might want to do an assessment. So typically, schools will come to us and say, something is not working. I know it doesn't need to be like this, but I don't know how to fix it. Or I know we need to improve, and we need to know more in order to make those improvements. Or sometimes we simply want an objective third-party review. Oftentimes that's a situation where there's concern about understanding of systems, or there may be new leadership that needs support in understanding the configurations that they have currently and how to use those to make their institutional goals. So there's a lot of reasons why an assessment, and particularly an assessment in recruiting and admissions, might be relevant for your institution. But other questions that come up are, we have all this software, but we don't seem to be getting the results that we want, or our staff is overwhelmed by the way the processes are working, and we're feeling like we're not delivering on the promise that we've made to our students and families that are engaged in this process. Sometimes it's we have goals, but we can't really figure out how to measure those goals with the data that we have. Or recently, and really in the recent years, there has been so much change in the way we are expected to behave in admissions and recruiting that we just really need somebody to help us get organized and really understand the work that's in front of us. Then there's a question of timing. So when is the right time to do an assessment? And in admissions and recruiting, it can take really two forms. I'm sure there's more, but these are the two that I most commonly run into. One is that there's a critical issue that's happening right now in our process that's impacting the numbers of applications, the types of applications, the benefit of a recruiting process. Something's broken. So that's one reason. And if that were the case, we would want to get to that problem quickly through this process. But the other part is really as part of planning for an upcoming cycle. Now, some schools, I worked in a school where we had we had rolling admission, but we did have a cycle. The cycles started in July roughly for the following fall. And we took time in that August timeframe, which, as many of you will know, is a tough time frame, because that's when you're yielding the class, but you're also developing your recruiting, or implementing, actually in August by that point, you're implementing your recruiting plan and strategy for the following fall if you're a fall-to-fall school. So taking the time then, whatever that cycle is, you may be on a 7-week cycle, you may be on a 14-week cycle, you may be on a year and 3-month cycle, to really plan for that and to look for those benefits. I used to work at an Ivy League institution, and we had a breathing time in about the June timeframe where we could actually do this. And that's really very important as part of the entire process, to think of when is the optimal timing. We hope it's not when you're having an emergency, but we're happy to step in if it is. We would like to see it as part of your overall planning effort. So right now, for example, I know the Common Application is getting ready to come up. Are there things that you need to be concerned about in terms of your process to begin to work with that the new application? Then the next question is, who participates in an assessment? And it really depends on the kind of assessment we're doing. And today we're focusing on admissions and recruiting. So that means the leadership team from admissions and recruiting, your information technology leadership, whether that's embedded in your admissions and recruiting office or in a separate area of the college. Your admissions and recruiting operations folks, those are the people who manage the movement of data, the processing of paperwork, and the general operations of the organization. Your admissions and recruiting counselors, so however you name them in terms of your staff, everybody has a slightly different structure and slightly different names, but the people who are frontline with students and families and expected to be using data perhaps to manage their own processes. And then finally, in addition to the information technology leadership, whomever the information technology staff are who are supporting you. So you can see that the people who participate in this kind of assessment cross both the technology side of the house as well as the business process side of the house. And that's very important to have those two perspectives, broad perspectives in this process. Then how do we do an assessment? I'll talk a little bit more in detail about this, but really the assessment is to catalog the issues and concerns. So those are the things that are bottlenecks, collect the information that we need, analyze the information, and develop the recommendations. So if you decide that that's the direction that you want to take, what would that look like for you and your institution? So the basics. First thing I want to say is, while I'm going to talk about things in general terms, we do not take a cookie cutter approach to this. I mentioned earlier that we take a holistic approach to your organization, and we do that for a reason. We do that because not everyone is the same. We recognize that, and we want to make sure that as we look at your systems and processes, that we understand who you are as an institution. So we want to get to know you. And from recruiting and admission, we really want to know the strategy, the goals, your tool sets, and that can include technology, but it's also other things. Is your phone system supporting you in this? Do you have a call center? What are the other kinds of things that might be in that tool set? Then we want to understand your processes, and we want to know more about your staff and your staffing model. And then we will apply our expertise from the many institutions that we've worked with and from our own professional experience and expertise to make recommendations that are just for you and your organization based on the situation that's present there. So how do we collect the information? We collect it from documentation. We collect it from people. Collecting it from people is usually the bulk of the work that we do through interviews, through focus groups, and through ongoing conversation with people in your organization. Once we've collected that information, we take all that stuff that we've gotten from documentation and from people and from our systems review, and we analyze it. Our systems review will depend on the systems that you have. Some systems allow us to run something called an optimizer report that lets us take a look at your overall configuration. We would do this to look for issues of access, of challenges with automations and other kinds of things. We would also look at the configuration that impacts admission and recruiting of any system that we could have access to. And then we work to help you get to that alignment by identifying those gaps between current state and desired state and developing recommendations that might include simple systems reconfigurations. They might include complex process adjustments. It just depends. But we will look for types and approaches that will, while they will vary, we're looking for immediate benefit. We're looking to scaffold what we do to give you medium and longer term benefit so that things are organized in a way that you will continue to see improvement as you work through this process of alignment. And I want to say that with everything we do at Ferrilli, it all starts with a conversation. And if you would like to engage in that conversation with us, I've posted our general information email and our phone number, and I will have that on a later slide as well. But we would really look forward to having that conversation with you about the situation at your institution and how we might be able to support you in this kind of activity. With that, Stephen, I'll just ask, do we have any questions that have come up at all?
Yeah, if you have any, we don't have any questions at the moment. If you have any, please feel free to either type them in the chat or you can come off of mute and ask them directly.
We can start that conversation right now if you'd like to.
Yeah, and if there are no questions, then we can wrap up. And anyone who wants to kind of hang on and have a more of a private convo, we can do that as well. So I want to thank everyone for joining us for sure. And if you want to keep up with what webinar is coming up next, you can always go to ferrilli.com/what's new, and that'll let you know what webinars we have coming up. And on the previous slide, Carol had info at Ferrilli. If you have any ideas for webinars that you would like to see or things that are kind of topical for your institution, please feel free to email us and let us know what you'd like to see. Thank you so much, everyone.